Hello and welcome to the Business Spotlight interview series. I am your host, Barrett McDonald, and today I am joined by Alan Uren, who is the founder, president, and CEO of OverVue Planning Systems, Inc. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. If you don't mind kicking us off with a brief background as to who you are and what it is you do.
Who I am, that goes back a long ways. Started out in the Canadian Navy and served here in Halifax for almost 7 years. And my wife and I then decided to become entrepreneurs. We knew absolutely nothing about it, but we managed to hook up with a company that was setting up regional offices across the country for training and consulting, primarily in time management and that type of thing. So we stayed at that. It was a 25-year overnight success. And we enjoyed it. And then we decided we'd take early retirement. That Freedom 55 thing kicked in. We went off and bought an old boat. And 2009, we sailed off down to the Caribbean for about 8 years or so. We would come back in the summer. What happened towards the end of, started in 1994. One of our colleagues was a project manager and consultant, and he had developed a training program in developing project plans, and he offered to show me what it looked like, and I was intrigued. I'd never done any project planning before, and he had an entirely different way of doing it, I found out. I thought everybody did it this way and found out that nobody did it this way. Okay. Eventually, over the next close to 10 years, I became the international program director for the company. Priority Management was its name. And I helped set up the various offices and certify their facilitators and consultants in that process. The one question that always came out, and still comes out today, people were looking for what we did in a manual mode. Was there no software available for it? And that we kept waiting for the software to come, and it never did. Yeah. Now, partway through our early retirement in 2010, Apple came out with the iPad. And the very first moment I looked at it, I said, that's the actual user interface that our approach and our graphical approach to project planning, that then the light bulb went on. So it's going to have to be like that. I didn't know how it was going to get done. I still thought somebody else was going to do it, and nobody did. In 2016, we were making plans to come back to Nova Scotia on a full-time basis. We were coming back in the summer times and stuff like that. Come back here on a full-time basis. And then I surprised my wife, Heather, and by saying, I think I'm going to give this a shot. So we started developing and stuff like that.
Nice. And what is it, in a brief summary, that your company does, just for our viewers' pleasure?
Okay. The software is called OverVue, and in its basic format, it's a combination of the best parts of project tools that have been around, some of which have been around for 100 years. Henry Gantt popularized what's called the Gantt chart or bar chart. Then in 1949, Toyota came out with what they call Kanban, or now referred to in many places Agile, which is these vertical swim lanes of handling multiple tasks and staging them. Network diagrams were out in around the 1950s or so. So what we did, and it wasn't me that did it, it was my mentor by the name of Dean Kyle, and he's retired now in Victoria. He's originally from New Brunswick. And he came up with an approach to combining this in a manual format that nobody else had ever done before. And then he built a training program, which I grasped onto and helped made it more commercially viable, and
Okay.
then started spreading it around from Australia through North America and into Europe and in Middle East and so forth. The primary difference is the graphics of it is so different. The restriction in the software today is based on the architecture of a spreadsheet where you have rows and columns of information and data.
Right. Okay.
And the unfortunate thing is that when you put a product like MS Project together on that architecture, it means you get one task on one row at a time. And they're staggered. And what happens is, in a large plan of, say, several thousand tasks, you start at the top left corner and it cascades down multiple pages in order to see that plan. And
Right.
unfortunately, it disappears. Ours doesn't have that. Ours is based on the columns for time, but we don't have the restrictions of the rows. And without going into diagrams and all of that kind of stuff, it is absolutely stunning, the difference that people see. And I was mentioning recently about a contact with a company, KPMG, out of Toronto, and one of their very senior partners in charge of mega projects mentioned that 20 years ago we built plans on walls, and today we build them in small electronic boxes we call computers, and we can't see the plan anymore. And that's the primary difference with OverVue. OverVue allows them to see it. In fact, it's even three-dimensional. It zooms in and zooms out, shows different levels of detail in its time scale in putting that together.
It sounds very innovative and time saving for some of the big companies on some very large scale projects. So hats off for creating that software that's going to rework how people think about massive projects. So thinking back to your history as an entrepreneur, if you had to start from square one in business, what would you do differently this time around?
Are you going back to the early days when we were starting?
Your choice.
Yeah.
What made you take that leap, and how would you do it differently?
Boy. I've thought about this in a couple of different ways. My life has over the years been somewhat adventuresome. I was a bit of an independent thinker. I mean, I dropped out of high school twice. I was like in Ontario at the time. I think I was 20 or 21 by the time I finished high school.
Okay.
Joined the Navy. I needed somebody to tell me. I went off to university. I didn't do that well in it to start off with. I eventually finished. But I then said, I need somebody to tell me what to do, and joined the Navy, and that helped a lot. What I would do differently, I'm not sure I would change a lot of it. Coming into being a startup entrepreneur is way different than our original with the priority management was similar to a franchise. Not quite the same legal arrangement, but very similar. They had a product, they had a brand, they had all of that stuff in there. All we had to do is figure out, is their selling process going to work for us here in Atlantic Canada or not? And it did to an extent. And we had to change it a little bit for our marketplace, but that wasn't too bad. And it was perseverance that paid off. In a startup, in developing something brand new, I was blissfully naive in terms of how long it was going to take.
Okay.
You hear about some of these folks that, 2 years later, they're selling it out for megabucks and all that kind of stuff. And that myth is out there and permeates to this day. But any of the ones that we eventually began to talk to, and they said, nope, you're talking 5, 7, 10 years. we're just finishing up the 6th year now. And I can't believe the amount of work. I I have never worked this hard on anything in my life as what we've done on this. It's been rewarding. It's all get out. Sometimes my impatience gets in front of me.
So would you say you would have started it earlier, or you would have had a better grasp of the task at hand?
Well, I think in both occasions, Barrett, and I think this is quite true across the spectrum. I think that people that go in and start their own business, there's a certain amount of sheer naivety that gets them in there. If we knew before we started just how much work was going to go into it, I think that what happens is a lot of people don't make that leap. You have to have a lot of optimism. You have to have a lot of belief that you can persevere. And I'll tell you, I mean, on this one, I could have quit 1,000 times. Honest to Pete, some of the frustration level it's been, I'm just through the roof on occasions. On the other hand, when you get the wins, they are all the sweeter.
Well, I'm probably quite glad that you didn't stop, because it sounds like what you're creating is going to be life-changing for a lot of different scenarios. So when you talk about the work that goes into a startup and everything, how do you balance your personal life and the demands of running a business, and what kind of advice can you share for some futurepreneurs that are going to be catching this series?
Holy cow. You have to have a really understanding partner. Okay. Really understanding partner, because it is, to a certain extent, part of the what made this work was COVID.
Okay.
When we were developing our software and COVID, and we were just getting going, in 2018 we incorporated, and 2019 we had it pretty close to a working prototype, and then COVID came along. We weren't going out very much anyway. We had small home offices. All of us are literally in home offices. Right. But it actually paid off big time for us, because as we were doing our first prototype, we work with a company out of Houston, Texas, Transocean it's called. And we'd been working with them on the manual version of this approach for, I think I did a workshop out of Dallas, Texas in around 2002. So they were very familiar with this, and we immediately wanted them to help beta test. And during the Zoom call, we were just getting used to Zoom at the time. During the Zoom call, the first 10 minutes, they said, "You're going to save us $20,000 before we even turn the software on." And we said, "Well, we stopped for a moment and said, well, what are you talking about?" He says, "Well, we have a refit of a drill rig that's just pulling into Aberdeen, Scotland. And we've got guys here in Houston, and we've got guys over in Oslo, Norway, and they've got to get over there." He said, "We don't have to buy a plane ticket anymore, because we built it to be able to work virtually, because my partner's in Sydney, Australia, and we never get to see each other. And our software engineers in Eastern Europe, I've still not met him." Okay. And so the entire software was built so that we could actually do the planning at the same time. So that was a bit of you take advantage of it.
Absolutely. So when you think about everyone working remotely, and some people you've never shaken their hand just because of the nature of what the business is, what qualities do you look for in employees, and like, how do you try to keep everyone focused working remotely in a positive work environment?
I would love to, after all my years being an entrepreneur, I'd love to be able to say, I did this, and this, and that would be baloney. As an entrepreneur, I hate dealing with those kinds of details. I've got an annual general meeting coming up on Monday, and now we've got 4 directors instead of just the 2 of us at the start, and there's other people involved. and I've got to put this thing together for an annual general meeting. I've never run a general meeting before. I've been in lots of them. I've never run one, and I'm sitting here pulling my hair out. So we have a meeting next week with a young woman who is absolutely blowing our mind. And she approached us. She's based out of Los Angeles, and she's done some incredible stuff in project planning, and she has her own consulting firm, and we're just dying to see if we can attract her, especially in that huge US market. We're looking for somebody. And I think that the number one thing that we grasp onto more than anything else, they have to fall in love with the product.
Yeah.
If they don't love it, I mean, if all they're doing is coming in for the money, that's useless. It's useless. My son here is being paid a pittance compared to what he could be doing out right now in the real world, if you will. But he loves. He's hooked on what it is that we're doing, and that's everything when it comes to a startup.
So you're looking for the passion within that person and making that linkage.
Absolutely.
It's a really good trait to find. That's a good strategy.
Yeah. And if you get that, I believe that a lot of the other stuff is going to fall into place, that I can be forgiven because they know I'm an absolutely true believer in this whole thing. I couldn't lead this thing. I couldn't have put 6 years into this without it. And the people that are around me right now, they keep telling me, I go to the seminars sometimes, and they keep saying that most startups lose partners so far along the way. It's very common. And I'm looking around and said, well, I must be doing something right because I've not lost anybody.
Yeah, you're gaining people.
Yeah.
So that speaks to a good culture. So what have been your biggest learnings as an employer since you began in business?
I guess the biggest one is don't spend more than you can afford. And I had to make a tough decision here recently. I said I haven't lost anybody. We took on a software intern, recent graduate out of Dalhousie University here, early on, and the internship was for 4 months. And I said, we would love to be able to hire you at the end of this thing, but I can't make you that promise. I said, I don't know when the next big account is going to land to make this affordable. So I'm gonna tell you that up front. I'm not gonna make any false promises. And unfortunately, it didn't fall into place. But this guy worked hard for us, and I'm sure he's gonna do well. And we may be able to rehire him at a later date. I don't know. But I think the one thing that I've done all the way along is I'm not spending more than we can afford. So hence, it's probably taken us longer. In fact, where we're at right now is we're going into our first pre-seed round. This is when, after 6 years, we're now going to approach friends and family and fools, they call them, for the early investment round that we're looking for. Sort of as the predecessor to then start going after the seed rounds for venture capital.
Sounds like a good plan that you're working towards and gaining towards. So what would you say are some of the common misconceptions about running a business, and how do you address them within your enterprise?
Misconceptions about it? I'm not sure there are misconceptions. I guess and this is the space that we're in, because we're in IT and development and so on. And you look around what's going on around the world, and so many things seem to be in worse shape now than they were even just a few years back. The one thing that keeps us going is that we continually watch what's happening in development and so on. And the stuff that's going on is just absolutely breathtaking in so many different ways. And I can't help but saying, the world's in a really rough spot right now, and you could become really negative and be disappointed and discouraged. But when we see what's coming along on what's already here. I mean, look at, artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on. A year ago, most of us never touched it. And a year later, it's now a tool that I use on a daily basis. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I don't dwell on those things too much.
Well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with having a positive attitude and looking forward and just enjoying the journey of the highs and lows of creativity and entrepreneurship is a fun way to be. So what would you attribute to the growth of your past and current business?
Yeah, don't ever give up. That's it. Yeah. If you believe that it's worth it, don't give up, because, and I've thought about it, just about did it, and the only thing that kept me going is I knew that the moment I did, I'd be disappointed, really, really disappointed. And I'm not sure we're out of the woods yet, Barry. I'm not sure that we're out of it. I mean, we're in a massive, massive market. It's one of our biggest challenges is focusing, and that's what, fortunately, calling it is helping me do that now. Is that we've focused much more closer to home. We've got a contractor just working down in the street, and his company is putting up a building there, across from the Parade Square on Barrington Street.
Okay.
We've got, it's that focus in saying this one is such a huge market that we could be scattered, and I have been scattered these past years, and this is now sorting things out.
Absolutely, which is a good way to be. So before we wrap things up, do you have any final words of advice for anyone thinking about becoming an entrepreneur?
There was a really good article in LinkedIn not too long ago. And actually it was dovetailed off of, and I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs. And there are several of his, the videos of him that are absolute classics. One I had not seen before was his analysis of the difference between an idea and an opportunity. And he basically said ideas are absolutely worthless. Everybody's got them. It's the ability and the conviction and the commitment to take the idea and actually make it come true. That's the difference. And that's where I think some people think that, oh, if somebody's got the latest app, I can go and do one of those too. It has to be an original. It has to have merit. And I've lived this where I had my idea, I didn't have anything, and I went walking around and saying, look at this, and everybody just turned their nose up, and I couldn't understand because they couldn't see what I could see.
Right.
So you have to be able to visualize that idea and see what could it become, and that's the challenge, is the conversion of the idea to something that's tangible, that somebody else is willing to part money with. And that's the end point.
Absolutely. That's a good tip. And anything that comes from Steve Jobs, no questioning what he's accomplished. So thank you so much for your time today, Alan. It was great meeting you and learning more about your entrepreneurial journey. And to everyone watching, I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.
Great. Thank you very much.